I'm going to go through the tax proposals of each party, in this presidential election, because many of them for the first time impact seniors and they impact people who are retired. And one really big one impacts, which is almost unheard of for the last 30, 40 years, but finally it's here. Someone has proposed eliminating taxes on those of us who live outside the United States but are who are American. We're American and you got to file, and all of a sudden maybe we don't have to. So I'm going to go through those, and they're huge, okay? So this is what we're going to go through. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime pay, no federal tax on Social Security payments, what the new capital gains rates may be, and the overall tax rates and approach to taxes in general. And then we're going to have a pretty decent discussion about the double taxation of Americans that are outside the United States. And it really behooves a really big conversation for people in that position like you and I, and also for people who live in the United States and don't live outside, and they can't really understand why shouldn't you pay taxes? I was going to do this myself, and I could do it and just go through, here's what everybody proposes, blah, blah, blah. But I happened to see a video as I was doing this one by a guy named Carlton Dennis, and he's an accountant and he does a YouTube channel. He's sort of a younger guy, looks like he's somewhere between 35 and 40, somewhere in there. And he's really smart and he's really good and he talks really well and explains things. And I thought, okay, well, he did a video that he takes all of the tax proposals of both candidates and he's comparing them. And there's a lot of policies there. There's like 10, 15 somewhere in there. I cherry picked the ones that only go to us, only for seniors and retirees. If it wouldn't have an effect on us, generally, then I skipped it. So I just cherry picked out of his video him. So I'm going to throw out the subject, and I'm going to let him do the explanation, and he's really good at it. So I just thought it would make the video better that I have a CPA doing this. And also, as you're watching this, he's saying this as if you or I are a client. So he's given client advice that you would normally pay for. And again, if you want to see his whole video on this, where he does all the policy changes, proposals, a link is below for his channel and for that specific video, okay? So, long. For all of that out of the way now, let's go to the first one, and that is tax on tips, getting rid of that.
Kamala Harris proposed eliminating taxes on tips for hospitality and service workers. This could potentially have a tremendous tax-reducing effect for tipped workers. I mean, think about how many tipped workers there are in the United States. Trump also supports eliminating taxes on tips, and in fact, he was the first one to propose this idea, and Kamala Harris copied the idea and proposed it several weeks after Trump proposed it. So, if you happen to be a tipped worker, such as a busboy, maid, waiter, waitress, bartender, caddy, you know what I'm talking about. There's a very good chance that you could be saving a lot of money in taxes, regardless of who wins this election.
That may not seem like one, but how many people do you know, and I know a pretty fair amount, that people who are retired and they want to earn a little bit more money, maybe they want an extra $10,000 for something, and they used to be a waiter, or they've done it, or they wanted to try it, and they're a waiter or a waitress, and maybe they make an extra $10,000. This way, they lose none of that tip money, which might be $8,000 out of the 10, $2,000 salary, lousy salaries for waiters, but good on tips, something like that. And what if you're making 20 grand? It might be like 15,005. The next one is overtime pay.
Kamala Harris has yet to make any tax proposals related to overtime pay. Donald Trump has proposed eliminating taxes on overtime pay. He made this proposal shortly after the debate with Kamala Harris and argued that eliminating taxes on overtime pay could help to incentivize people to work for longer hours, which would be beneficial to both themselves and to the companies that they work for. Love this one.
Again, your mind probably goes to, well, that probably won't affect me because I'm retired, but there's a lot of retirees who just go into a Home Depot. And there's a lot of, guys who used to be plumbers, they used to work in construction, they were painters or something, and they're working part-time in there just to bring up a little bit more money. And they'll take the full-time workers and, they have the day off, but then it's the part-time workers that are running the store and it would be a holiday, so there's overtime pay, and you get to keep the extra money. So there's no tax on that, again, if it goes through. And here's the really big one, this proposal. Your Social Security check, no federal income tax on it.
Kamala Harris has yet to announce any significant changes to Social Security taxes. Trump has announced that he wants to eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits. So, if you happen to be disabled or elderly, you qualify for Social Security benefits, then you could soon not have to pay any more taxes on your Social Security benefits if Trump is elected and if this proposal becomes law. I never understood how we pay into Social Security and then later on in life, a percentage of our Social Security, depending on our income, is still taxed. Never made sense to me. So
that's a huge one for another reason too, because to go back to what I was sort of saying earlier, when you have a certain amount of income from Social Security, let's just say it's $2,000 each for each person, $2,000 and $2,000 a month. So you got $48,000 coming in, okay? And then maybe you have a little small pension, maybe it's another $20,000 from working some job. Maybe you were a teacher for a little while or on the police force or something like that. When you add that up, you got 24, and 20, you got 48, and another 20, you got $68,000. That's your tax bracket, okay? You pull that 24 and 24 out, and all of a sudden your pay just went to 20 grand. Your tax would be zero because you're going to be below the threshold of paying any tax at all. So the amount of money that a retiree could all of a sudden have is huge. So, that's a big deal to take federal taxes off of Social Security payments. Let's take a look at the capital gains rates, because usually when you're retired, you've saved, your life. You've got some stocks and things. You might have a rental home. You decide to sell it. There's going to be a capital gain on that or some other thing, gold, silver, whatever, okay? So what are those rates?
Kamala Harris has made several proposals regarding capital gains taxes. The first one is that she wants to tax unrealized capital gains, but for the wealthy. The way that this tax would work is that families with over 100 million of wealth would owe an annual wealth tax of up to 25% that would include tax on unrealized capital gains. If you don't know what an unrealized capital gain is, it's a hypothetical profit that you could potentially make one day when you sell a capital asset in the future. They're called unrealized gains because they don't actually exist yet. So if Kamala Harris becomes president, then yes, you could potentially owe taxes on fictional profits. This proposal would only start out applying to the ultra wealthy, but many tax proposals that start out only applying to the wealthy end up applying to more and more people over time. Kamala Harris also wants to raise the long-term capital gains rates from 20% to 28% for those making $1 million or more per year. If you're someone who likes to invest in real estate, stocks, bonds, even precious metals, or cryptocurrency, there's a very good chance that you'll be forced to pay significantly higher capital gains tax rates if Kamala Harris is elected, and if you're somebody that's making over $1 million. Okay, what about Trump? What has Trump said about capital gains rates? So far, Trump has not made any major tax proposals for capital gains taxes, so we can assume that he plans to keep them the same as they are for now. This would mean that unrealized capital gains would not be taxed, and long-term capital gains would likely stay at 0, 15, and 20%. Where they're at now.
And then there's the overall tax rates and the approach to them.
It is important to note that the individual income tax cuts that were established through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, they're set to expire in 2025. This means that unless Congress votes to extend them, individual income taxes are set to increase for everybody come 2025. Kamala Harris has announced that she does not plan to raise individual income taxes for people making less than $400,000 per year. However, she has expressed support for President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget proposal, which proposes increasing the top individual tax rate from 37% to 39.6%. So there is a very good chance that Kamala could attempt to raise individual income taxes for high earners if she is elected. Trump, on the other hand, wants to prevent the individual Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that he created from expiring. He wants to make them permanent so that tens and millions of Americans can continue to pay these lower tax rates that he established.
All right, thanks, Carlton. And finally, the last thing, which is double taxation. No more double taxation. This is something that Donald Trump threw out maybe about 2 weeks ago. It was not on Carlton's video because it came out after he made his video. So, I'm going to put it in here, obviously, because it's a big one. Because if you're living out of the country, which so many expats and retirees do, Panama, Argentina, Thailand, doesn't matter where you are. If you're American, typically you have to file your taxes. For those of you who don't know it and you think, well, you're an American, you should be able to pay, you need to understand something. One, the United States is the only country that does this in the entire world other than one other tiny little dictatorship. So there's that. For fairness, it's not really fair to be taxed out of the country when you get nothing, for it. Now, Trump proposed this, but even Bernie Sanders has been saying this for years. And also, little organizations, and every once in a while, a congressperson or a senator, like Bernie Sanders, will propose it, and basically they get ignored. They get blown out of the water because for people who are out of the United States, no one cares. And why should we give them anything? And that's, I'm sure, has been the thinking. Whatever. This year has been dramatically different because I'll tell you what happened to me, and I'm sure it's probably happened to many of you that are watching. And I've never gotten this before. This year, I have gotten 4 letters that came to me, in a typical envelope paper, and probably 8 or 9 emails from different organizations. Vote by mail, vote from abroad, vote from the Kamala Harris campaign, also the Trump campaign. They're like coming for us because I think they all finally realized, it sort of dawned on somebody, that with 8 million Americans outside the United States who can vote, and you can choose which state you want to vote in. Think of that for a second. Where there's swing states, and the swing states are, they swing on like 10,000 votes. You have 8 million people out of the country that can pick states to vote in. And even swing ones that are not swing states, like I think Georgia, if I recall, I could be wrong on this, but I'm sure it'll be right for some state. But I think Georgia, the whole state went on like 40,000 votes. That was the difference. Or that maybe it was Arizona. It was one of them. But with 8 million people out of the country, if they choose to vote in a particular state, they could swing that state by it could flip it by 100,000 votes, going a different way. It'd be like that. So I think what ended up happening is both parties started to realize, and if you're watching and you work in Congress or you work for one of those parties, if you haven't realized this, let me be the first to tell you, the largest amount of swing voters is not a swing state. It's those outside the United States. That's the biggest swing vote that you could ever go after. It's 8 million people who have been ignored the entire lives up till now. All of a sudden, one guy's sort of throwing it out there. Hopefully there's a lot of talk about it because it's like, you would want to do what politicians do for everyone, and it doesn't matter if you're poor, if you're rich, if you're a corporation or something else, or whatever. They give free stuff to people. You want to get the young vote, you make something free and give it to them. Old vote, you give something to them, so on and so forth. But when you're living out of the country, no one has ever given us anything. Nothing that would help us being out of the country. So we're down to, you want the vote? Give me something. Because your normal stuff does nothing for us. So you give me something, I'll vote for you directly, swing the vote your way. That's kind of where we are. Just thought I'd throw that out to you. Anyway, but there's one real good reason, and I'm going to go through it for you on the screen. I'll have to go to the computer. I was just sort of goofing around and just asking some simple questions. So I was thinking, well, if there's 8 million people that decided to all file for real, how many IRS agents would it take to actually process 8 million extra people? I'll show you the number, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars of extra cost to get nothing. This is the State Department's most recent figure of January of 2013. Okay, that's 11 years ago. 6.8 million, up from 6.3 million in July of 2012. So in a year, this thing has gone up 500,000. Just sort of taking that out and racking it out, to today, there's probably roughly, given this, 8 million Americans outside of the United States. And so I'm going to go with that number. Even if it was 7 million, you're still going to get an absurd number when we get to the end, which is fascinating. This is a list of countries where Americans live outside the United States. See where it says percent of all Americans abroad? That's saying that 26.55% of all Americans outside the United States where they're living, they live in Mexico. 9% is in Canada, and so forth. On the left-hand side, where you see 35%, and a little lower down by Malaysia, it says 30, and 30 for El Salvador. That's the highest federal tax rate in those countries. For all of the other countries, every one of them, they're above 37%, which you see for the United States up at the top. They all have higher tax rates than the United States, which means because of treaties and for other things, if you live in those countries, you will not have to pay any tax in the United States unless there's no treaty. But if there's a treaty, you won't have to pay anything into the United States. So, and almost all of these are treaty countries, pretty much. I don't know about Bangladesh, but then, I don't think too many people are retiring to Bangladesh. So with all of that in mind, 8 million Americans outside the United States, virtually all of them aren't going to be paying hardly anything into into the IRS for taxes because they live in treaty countries and the tax rates are higher in other countries. I started to wonder, well, what does it actually cost to do this? So taking a look at this from the top, and I'll run through it real quick. If you had 8 million people out of the United States, that means there's 8 million returns that have to be filed, right? And then we're like, well, how much does it take in time to actually check a return? I mean, to do some of these returns outside of the country, because they're huge, 20, 30, 40 pages sometimes for simple returns. I'm just saying, well, okay, it probably takes at least 2 hours to check each return. All right, well, how many could you get a day? Well, if you're a typical agent, 8-hour day, you could only get 4 of them a day. That's how many you could check, right? Maybe it's more, but let's just go with this number, okay? You're checking 4. Okay, well, what does that turn out to be? That turns out to be 2 million work days to check all the returns. So let's divide that by 365 days in the year. Obviously, people only work 250, and there's also vacations and things, but I'm going to divide it by 365. If you divide 2 million work days by 365 days, because you want everything done in the year that they come in, that's 5,479 agents that you would need. On a 250 day work year, the typical person only works 250 days in the year. You need 8,000 agents. But we're going to keep going with the 5,479. What do you think a salary of an IRS agent is? I mean, they're smart. They probably are accountants for many of them. Some might even be lawyers and other things. They're going to know what they're doing. And I would think 60 grand is probably about as, I don't know, I wouldn't think it would be too much lower than $60,000. And I'm ignoring pensions and medical and, the Social Security payments that the government would have to make on their behalf. So it's probably higher than that, but let's just go with 60. So if they're getting 60 grand, the cost to check those returns is $328 million to check the returns. But I'm pretty sure $328 million is not coming in. Now, to add on more to that, I'm just guessing at this part, they're going to have to be in a building with desks, chairs, computers, paper, heat, electricity, supplies, internet, phones, copy machines, and a management staff making more than 60 grand over the top of them. But I just threw it in at 50 million. Okay, I think that's, probably low, but when you add that up, you're at $378 million to do these returns. Probably it's closer to 400 million or 450 million to actually do this for not a lot of return. So again, hopefully somebody from government is looking at this and going, yeah, you know what? He's got a pretty good point there. Why don't we stop trying to take expats and people who are retired out of the U.S. and have them file and turn all these agents loose on big corporations or other things where we can really rack in the dough and, and bring the deficit down and all that usual stuff, okay? Anyway, I just thought it was interesting to go through the numbers. So there you go. Hope that helped. There's some good information, help you vote. Although it's probably too late to vote. Just only a couple weeks to go. I don't think unless you haven't voted already, or you're just about to mail your thing in and get it in on time. If you haven't registered to vote from abroad, I don't think you can make it now. I recall when I did it, it was like maybe a month and a half, 2 months to actually, get it all done and stuff and be vetted that it was okay to vote. Although, I don't know, maybe it's different now. I mean, you can certainly try it. I'll put a link below if I can find one for you, and you can do that. Anyway, if you like this, subscribe to the channel because we're kind of all over the place, but it's always something about retirement and for seniors. And until that next video, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate it. See ya.